The winter sky over northern France hung low and pale, dimmed beneath sheets of drifting cloud that seemed to press silence upon the battered countryside. It was the early morning of December 19th, 1944. A column of exhausted Wehrmacht infantry from the Sechste Panzerarmee shuffled westward, retreating from the chaos unfolding along the Ardennes front. Their boots crunched reluctantly through hoarfrost-stiff earth, each step burdened by the creeping realization that the promised winter victory had already begun to unravel. A young corporal, Wilhelm Kraus, trudged near the front of the column, his scarf crusted stiff with frozen breath, his Mauser rifle awkwardly slung beneath layers of wet wool. His regiment had spent the previous night harassing American positions along a wooded ridge, a failed attempt to exploit what Berlin insisted was crippling weakness among the Allies. They had expected demoralized infantry and scattered artillery. Instead, at first, light, something else arrived. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Even before they heard the engines, the soldiers sensed the change. A tremor passed through the trees, a low, rhythmic thrum unlike the thin, cutting whine of British Spitfires or the steady hum of medium bombers. This sound was deeper, angrier, a pulsing roar that felt physical as though the air itself protested. Kraus looked up just as the clouds split, and three dark, muscular silhouettes dropped into view. Each machine cut a broad, almost cartoonish outline, massive blunt nose, thick wings, and squat fuselage that looked more like the belly of a locomotive than a fighter. The lead airplane dove straight toward the road, guns already flashing. Before Kraus could breathe, the world erupted. Lines of fire stitched across the frozen lane, chewing through trucks and men with the sound of ripping canvas magnified 10,000-fold. Kraus hurled himself into a roadside ditch as splinters of timber and bone rained down in choking dust. The aircraft tore past low, so low Kraus could see frost crystals streaking across its cowling before climbing sharply and banking for another run. Its engine bellowed, drowning shouts into nothingness. The corporal's hands pressed hard against his helmet as the second fighter swept in. Its 8 guns thundered again. A truck loaded with 20mm ammunition blossomed into flame. Men scattered, diving beneath what little cover remained. Kraus glimpsed a red, white, blue star on the wing, a bright insult against grey morning. Americans! As quickly as they had arrived, the fighters curved southward, engines fading into cloud. A stunned quiet settled on the ruins of the column. Kraus lifted his head. Bodies lay like broken dolls across the frozen fields. A horse, still hitched to a wagon, struggled on shattered legs. The corporal stared up at the sky, where clouds swallowed the last trace of their tormentors. He whispered a word he had heard repeated at the front, but never believed until now. Donnerbolzen, Thunderbolt. Berlin had promised that Allied air power would diminish in winter. Instead, as Kraus crawled from the ditch, he understood a new truth. The American fighter that German pilots once mocked now stalked their columns at will. It hunted not for glory, but for certainty, destruction delivered with cold, mechanical confidence. The path to this moment began long before Kraus found himself shivering in a French ditch. 3 years earlier, Luftwaffe officers had confidently briefed new pilots with an reassuring refrain. The Americans, though industrially formidable, produced aircraft lacking German sophistication. Their machines were lumbering, crude, more suited to basic ground attack roles than precision aerial combat. The Bf 109 and Focke-Wulf 190, crafted with intense engineering focus, had defined modern dogfighting. Nothing America built, the instructors said, could match German brilliance. It was an idea that suited the Germany of 1941, confident, ascendant, certain of its technological mastery. Instructors emphasized instinctive vertical fighting, climbing advantage, and tight roll response. The Luftwaffe, they taught, owned the sky through discipline and elegance. Even when American bombers first arrived, their escorts were few and limited. Early P-41s and British Hurricanes offered only sporadic challenge. The Thunderbolt's earliest forms, which trickled into Europe in 1942, seemed to confirm German predictions. Oversized, slow climbing, almost laughably unwieldy at low altitude. German pilots dubbed it the Fliegendies, Fass the flying barrel, yet behind that derision hid a subtle anxiety. Intelligence reports noted the Republic P-47's prodigious horsepower, a radial engine, that outmuscled anything in Europe, as well as a rugged airframe and 8 Browning heavy machine guns. But the pilots shrugged it off. A weapon, no matter how heavily built, meant little if its pilot could not seize the initiative. That was the logic until real combat began. In the spring of 1943, German fighter units in France and the Low Countries encountered increasing numbers of Thunderbolts escorting American bomber streams. Their behavior defied German assumptions. Instead of engaging in traditional turning combat, Thunderbolt pilots stayed high, diving with tremendous speed before climbing away with unexpected tenacity at altitude. German fighters could pursue neither maneuver with confidence. Luftwaffe vertical tactics no longer guaranteed dominance. It was not elegance that frightened German pilots, but the aircraft's persistence. Stories circulated at squadron briefings. P-47s, returning home with wings full of holes, engines coughing, yet somehow still flying. One pilot compared it to shooting at a steel locomotive. Another swore he saw a Thunderbolt withstand cannon hits that would have torn a Bf-109 apart. Engineers dismissed these accounts as exaggerations until wrecks were examined. For the Luftwaffe mechanical staff, the first close inspection of a downed Thunderbolt raised questions. The thickness of its aluminum skin, particularly along the wings and cockpit, exceeded that of most German fighters. Structural spars were sturdy to the point of redundancy. The cockpit bathtub surrounding the pilot was forged to resist not only small arms fire but cannon fragments. Even its massive radial engine, with no coolant system to bleed, could absorb astonishing damage yet continue operating. Such details had consequences. A Bf-109 or Focke-Wulf 190 might be crippled by a few well-placed machine gun rounds. The Thunderbolt often required dozens. Worse still, its 8 heavy guns unleashed a storm none could ignore. German ground crews described returning pilots pale and shaken, recounting how a single burst from a Thunderbolt shredded a fighter in seconds. Still, disbelief persisted among senior Luftwaffe officers. Reports of Thunderbolt survivability could be dismissed, but then came the first stories from soldiers on the ground, men like Wilhelm Kraus, whose columns and supply lines were ravaged with a brutality new even to hardened Eastern Front veterans. The Thunderbolt's arrival in large numbers in 1944 marked the beginning of a new strain of German fear, not only of aerial defeat, but of logistical collapse. German doctrine had long relied on rapid mechanized movement supported by reliable supply chains. But across France, Belgium, and the Netherlands, every daylight convoy became a gamble. Roads once considered safe under cloud cover now offered little shelter. Thunderbolts dove through breaks in the weather, striking with methodical precision. They were not easily turned away by light flak. They rarely fought alone. And when they appeared, they did not merely harass, they annihilated. In occupied France, army units reported catastrophic losses. Trucks burned in blackened rows. Fuel reserves disappeared in bursts of flame. Soldiers marched in darkness to avoid detection, but by 1944 daylight movement had become an invitation to death. Wilhelm Kraus learned this firsthand during the approach to the Ardennes. His regiment moved under strict orders. No lights, no engines before dawn. Yet, despite such caution, the Thunderbolts found them. For German infantry, the psychological toll was immense. While dive bombers like the Stuka had once delivered terror on behalf of Germany, now the thunder of engines overhead provoked dread. Soldiers recalled how early war propaganda had portrayed American airmen as lacking discipline, courage, and technical skill. That illusion dissolved beneath the weight of bitter experience. The American fighter they had mocked as a flying barrel now functioned as an industrial hammer, blunt, relentless, inescapable. More unsettling still was the realization that the enemy seemed inexhaustible. New Thunderbolts arrived daily. Fuel flowed like water. Replacement pilots were fresh and confident. To the depleted Luftwaffe, struggling with chronic shortages, each new P-47 represented not just danger but humiliation. German pilots, once the celebrated knights of the air, now flew fewer sorties, often against overwhelming numbers. They watched friends fall not in elegant duels, but beneath sudden, devastating strikes from above. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. This shift did not occur overnight. It took place gradually through 1943 and 1944, shaped by technical decisions made far from the battlefield. One of the most decisive changes came when American engineers replaced the Thunderbolt's original narrow propeller blades with 13-foot paddle-shaped blades that could harness the full power of its Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine. This modification, tested under skepticism, transformed the aircraft. Its climb rate improved sharply. Its acceleration surged. Suddenly, it could contest the vertical arena once dominated by German machines. Luftwaffe intelligence officers noted the change with concern. Squadrons that once pounced on Thunderbolts now found themselves unable to dictate engagements. Where once a Bf-109 could easily climb above a P-47, now such maneuvers carried lethal risk. German pilots who attempted vertical dives often discovered, too late, that the Thunderbolt could follow, and at terrifying speed. Some reported exceeding 500 miles per hour during dives, only to be chased still by the American machine. The Thunderbolt's robustness made these dives safer than for most fighters. While German aircraft risked compressibility at high speed, the P-47's thick wings and strong airframe held firm. Stories circulated of American pilots surviving near supersonic dives, recovering at the last moment. German engineers cautioned against attempting similar feats. By the time of the Ardennes offensive, Thunderbolts filled the skies from dawn to dusk. Their heavy machine guns shredded infantry positions, trucks, and artillery. They hunted bridges, locomotives, and horse-drawn wagons alike. No category of target felt safe. In letters home, some German soldiers described the Thunderbolt not as an aircraft, but as a sky plow, a machine that cut through everything in its path. For Wilhelm Kraus, the aftermath of that December ambush left a permanent imprint. He and a handful of survivors staggered into a nearby wood, seeking refuge among the trees. There, huddled around small, smokeless fire, they whispered about what they had seen. One soldier insisted the American pilots must have marked their column in advance. How else could they have struck with such precision? Another believed the aircraft carried armor that made them invulnerable to ground fire. None of them understood the true explanation. Relentless Allied reconnaissance and Allied industrial capacity, delivering overwhelming air superiority. The men did not speak of glory, only of fear. Kraus remembered his flight instructor back in 1941, standing before a chalkboard and describing the importance of initiative. "Possess the vertical," the instructor said. "You dictate the fight." But now, Kraus knew that wisdom belonged to another world. Initiative belonged to the Americans. The vertical belonged to the Thunderbolt. And this realization, slow, creeping, undeniable, would soon spread far beyond a frozen ditch in northern France. The German soldiers, who first encountered the P-47 Thunderbolt on the Western Front, often described the experience not with the technical coolness of pilots evaluating a machine, but with the raw emotion of men who felt a sudden shift in fate. To them, the Thunderbolt was not merely a fast American fighter, it was an inescapable omen that hung over the battlefield like a fist from the sky. In the summer of 1943, and especially throughout 1944, the Wehrmacht, already strained by the toll of the Eastern Front and the intensifying Allied bombing campaign, began to see this aircraft as a curse made of aluminum and steel. The sound of its massive turbo-supercharged engine was not simply a noise. It was a threat that echoed across French fields, Belgian crossroads, and German supply routes. Some soldiers claimed they could feel the roar in their chest before the attack even began. They would look up, searching for salvation or doom, but the thunderbolt came so fast and so high that it barely seemed real. The reason? German soldiers hated it more than any other aircraft was rooted in three truths. It survived what should have destroyed it. It struck with ruthless precision, and it returned again and again until nothing remained. Stories spread quickly through Wehrmacht ranks, so by 1944, the mythology of the P-47 was nearly as powerful as its machine guns. It was said that shooting at it was worthless, that hiding did nothing, and that running only made you an easier target. Soldiers joked grimly that even God could not shoot one down. No fighter in Europe inspired this level of dread among those on the ground. By mid-war, the Luftwaffe's capacity to protect German ground forces was fading. The combined bomber offensive forced German fighters into the skies against waves of B-17 seconds and B-24 seconds, while the P-51 Mustang cut deeply into German pilot numbers. But while the Mustang dominated the air in the final year, it was the P-47 that owned the ground. Wehrmacht troops believed the Mustang was a duelist, deadly but uninterested. The P-47, however, seemed to relish the massacre of anything that moved. It hunted convoys, trucks, rail lines, flak positions, and exposed infantry. That difference mattered emotionally. Fighting a duelist felt respectable. Being torn apart by a monster that never landed until everything was pulp felt humiliating. German soldiers first became aware of the Thunderbolt's toughness when scattered reports came back from frontline flak units. They complained that even concentrated bursts had trouble stopping the aircraft. More than one pilot returned to base with a wing shredded, parts of the fuselage missing, and holes large enough for a man to crawl through. This shocked the Germans because their 20mm cannons could bring down nearly anything in the air. But the Thunderbolt was designed differently. Its radial engine could absorb punishment that would immediately kill an inline engine fighter like the Bf-109 or TEW-190. The P-47 could lose oil, pressure, lose cylinders, even lose part of the propeller arc, and still fly home. The Germans found this unacceptable. Every instinct told them that something that size should fall when hit. Instead, it just kept coming. One infamous example involved a P-47 returning with almost half a cylinder bank destroyed, leaking fluid, and huge portions of the cowling torn away. It flew hundreds of kilometers back to England, landing safely. Stories like these became legend among Allied pilots, but among the Germans, they bred contempt and fear. Wehrmacht units assigned to watch the sky soon began identifying inbound aircraft not just by silhouette, but by how grim their prospects were. If someone shouted, "Thunderbolt," men ducked, scattered, or simply froze. The effect on morale was measurable. German officers reported that infantry units reacted to air threat assessments with disproportionate panic when thunderbolts were involved. Retreats were accelerated, supply movements cancelled, artillery batteries relocated prematurely. It was not simply fear of being killed, it was a certainty that the P-47 meant devastation whether they fought or surrendered. The Wehrmacht relied heavily on truck convoys to supply frontline units, and those convoys became priority targets of Allied fighter bombers. The P-47 excelled at ambush. It would sweep low over a road, cutting engines suddenly, and then roar downward like a falling boulder. The German experience was not just one of physical destruction. What made the Thunderbolt hated was how it attacked psychologically. In many testimonies, soldiers described feeling hunted. They believed the aircraft tracked them individually, almost personally. The truth was simpler. Allied pilots used excellent radio coordination, map referencing, and reconnaissance data to strike high-value targets. To Wehrmacht infantry, the speed and precision of these attacks felt supernatural. Men would dig foxholes beneath trees, only to watch the thunderbolts swoop with uncanny timing. When supply dumps exploded, when roads were cratered, when retreating columns became firestorms, word spread. The Americans see everything. The psychological wound deepened because the Germans prized technical superiority. The Bf-109 and FOBW-190 had dominated early war skies. Yet here was an American brute, large, heavy, inelegant, crushing the battlefield, not through grace but brute will and impossible survivability. That offended German pride as much as their bodies. They had believed finesse and engineering were the keys to victory. The P-47 proved that force multiplied by reliability could win battles faster than elegance ever could. By early 1944, the Wehrmacht felt the Thunderbolt's presence across Europe. In Italy, it tore apart retreating lines along the Apennines. In France, it turned hedgerows into flaming junkyards of twisted metal. In Belgium and Germany, it ravaged trains carrying fuel, ammunition, and men. The Germans tried camouflage, night movement, and dispersal, but the Thunderbolt adapted. It shifted tactics, hunting at dawn and dusk, using intelligence from advancing Allied troops, and attacking choke points relentlessly. A German sergeant described the experience as being eaten by wolves from the sky. He explained that wolves did not attack in a line or with predictability. They circled, pounced, vanished, and returned. The Thunderbolt's 8 50-caliber machine guns were devastating. A single burst could rip through armoured cars or shred infantry positions. But it was the ordnance delivery that truly horrified the Germans. The P-47 could carry bombs heavier than some early war medium bombers. When those bombs landed on crossroads, bridges, fuel storage, or troop concentrations, the damage was catastrophic. Survivors often described a deafening crack, earth lifting beneath them, and then hours of chaos as fires spread and the wounded screamed. Occasionally, it returned to strafe survivors. What sickened many soldiers was knowing that the Thunderbolt could kill them without needing accuracy. Just being near its target zone put them at risk. Precision came later. Terror began immediately. When supporting Allied ground forces, the P-47 loitered above the battlefield, waiting for calls from troops. German infantry attacked only when absolutely necessary, because every movement risked drawing the Thunderbolt's attention. Even elite formations such as Panzer Grenadiers felt exposed. No matter their training, they could not fight the sky. The concept of attacking while constantly looking up eroded discipline. Soldiers stopped thinking about objectives and focused on survival. Armoured units, the pride of the Wehrmacht, were particularly vulnerable. The Thunderbolt carried armour-piercing rockets that could penetrate tanks from above, an angle traditional armour could not protect. The sight of a tank, once a symbol of German strength, bursting into a plume of flame under the assault of a single fighter shattered morale. German officers tried to reassure their men. They claimed that the Thunderbolt was not invincible, that anti-aircraft fire could defeat it. But these statements rang hollow. Flak crews knew the truth. Most of the time, their weapons did not stop the P-47. Worse, firing at the fighter only attracted attention. Stories circulated that crews who fired were the first to die. These rumours further weakened resistance. When the Thunderbolt approached a defended target, guns sometimes fell silent, not from discipline but from fatalism. Retreating soldiers described rivers choked with burning trucks, fields where exhausted infantry crawled through grass, praying that the planes would overlook them, roads where the dead lay in rows, struck down not in heroic battle but while simply trying not to starve. It was this helplessness that drove hatred. The bombers above were terrifying, but bombs at least felt impersonal. The Thunderbolt, low and merciless, felt like murder. The P-47's ability to return home after absorbing ridiculous damage further hardened the myth. Wehrmacht troops sometimes celebrated when they saw a Thunderbolt trailing smoke, but hours later, reports confirmed that the aircraft had made it back, repaired, and flown again the next day. That felt unfair. A single German fighter crippled would never return to the air so quickly. The Americans seemed to have infinite machines, infinite fuel, infinite pilots. The Luftwaffe could not keep pace, so German ground forces felt abandoned. Harsh winter weather offered no relief. The Thunderbolt's powerful engine and rugged airframe allowed it to fly in conditions that grounded others. During the Battle of the Bulge, when fog and snow blocked most Allied aircraft, the P-47 still found ways through. German troops cursed the skies when they heard the rumbling engine emerging from clouds. The Americans, it seemed, had found a demon that loved every season. Perhaps the most painful truth for the Germans was that the Thunderbolt arrived exactly when their situation became most desperate. As Allied armies advanced, German forces needed mobility to reposition. That mobility now meant death. Roads belonged to the P-47. Stations belonged to the P-47. Bridges belonged to the P-47. Every kilometre of movement risked annihilation. German units sometimes abandoned vehicles and marched through forests, knowing the Thunderbolt could not see them beneath the canopy. But this slowed them to a crawl. Their war machine shrank from mechanized terror into frightened foot soldiers. That regression crushed their will. The last months of the war saw the Thunderbolt at its deadliest. With the Luftwaffe shattered, the skies were open. Thousands of Thunderbolts roamed freely. German soldiers came to believe the Americans had built a special machine where armor, fire, and the speed of angels combined. Even in defeat, the Germans preserved their respect for the fighter. Pilots of the Luftwaffe called it formidable. Infantrymen used harsher terms. They had lived underneath it, not beside it. They knew its appetite personally, and when they surrendered, many said aloud that the one aircraft they truly hated was the P-47. The Thunderbolt represented more than a weapon. It represented inevitability. With every bombing run, every strafing pass, every convoy turned to ash, it taught the Germans that their time was ending. And so the legend of their hatred was born not from arrogance, nor from excuse, but from bitter memory. Soldiers do not easily admit fear. Yet again and again, those who survived told the same story. The P-47 Thunderbolt was the storm that swallowed the West. The wind along the mountain pass carried the smell of old fire and distant snow. Dawn crept slowly over the jagged silhouettes, revealing a world carved by conflict and hardened by winter. We had survived the previous night only by huddling together in a shallow ravine, wrapped in damp blankets that smelled of smoke and canvas. Some slept with their rifles clutched across their chests. Others watched the darkness with half-frozen eyes, praying the enemy wouldn't find us. Part of me wished for silence, for a moment without fear, but war never grants such mercy. When the first rays of morning brushed the sky, our commander, Captain Moretti, whispered for us to rise. His voice was low, just loud enough to cut through exhaustion. We obeyed, moving slowly, our limbs stiff from cold. I looked around, counting heads. We were still 11. Yesterday we were 13. The two missing souls had fallen near a collapsed bridge at dusk, swallowed by the mist without ceremony. We buried them quickly, whispering only their names. In war, grief is a luxury. Memory is the only currency left to honour the dead. We marched toward the ridge where Part 2 had ended, where echoes of artillery had chased us like angry ghosts. Snow crunched beneath our boots. Every step reminded me of the thin line between survival and oblivion. The sun did little to warm us. Its pale light seemed too weary to fight the cold. That morning, I felt older than my years. Private Lang, youngest of us, carried a radio strapped to his back. Static hissed softly, fading in and out. "Any word?" I asked. He shook his head. The line had gone dead the night before. We hoped we could re-establish contact once we cleared the ridge. Commands, supplies, salvation, everything depended on that tenuous thread of communication. The ridge looked calm from afar, but the closer we came, the more we felt the tension. Tracks in the snow suggested someone had passed through recently. Not ours. The prints were narrow, purposeful. Captain Moretti signalled for us to halt. We crouched, weapons ready. My heartbeat grew loud enough to drown out the mountain's quiet. A flutter came from the trees. A bird, nothing more. Yet every twitch, every whisper, seemed like a herald of death. We moved again, this time slower. Frosted branches brushed our sleeves as we advanced. At the summit, the world opened in a panorama both beautiful and terrifying. To the east, smoke rose from what used to be a village. The valley below was scarred by trenches and craters. Farther off, we saw the glint of metal, perhaps vehicles, perhaps something worse. We found the remnants of a camp, a few scattered tin cups, a torn greatcoat, and boot prints leading north. No bodies. The fire pit still held warm ash. Whoever had been here left moments before our arrival. Captain Moretti ordered Lang to attempt radio contact. Lang knelt by a boulder, fiddling with knobs, murmuring into the handset. Static answered. He tried again. Suddenly, a voice crackled through broken, faint. Alpha unit, repeat fallback heavy. Then silence. Moretti frowned. We're still on our own, he said, but at least we know someone's alive. His confidence gave us strength. We pressed forward. Passing the ridge, we descended into a forest. Pines towered overhead like solemn sentinels. The smell of sap and frozen earth wrapped around us. Snow fell in slow, silent flakes. The sound of war seemed distant. But war is never truly far. I pictured the narrow street where I grew up, the bakery at the corner, the smell of fresh bread that always floated into my room. That memory kept me warm. I held it close like a talisman. In moments of calm, the mind flees to safer shores. A distant rumble shattered the quiet. We froze. The rumble grew into a roar. Tanks. We scattered into defensive positions. The ground trembled. Minutes passed. Then a metal shape emerged through the trees. An enemy tank, its turret scanning the forest. Another followed. Our rifles felt useless against that armor. Stay low, Moretti whispered. He signaled for us to hold fire. The tanks rolled past us, oblivious. But behind them came infantry. A squad of soldiers trudged through the snow, rifles slung over their shoulders. They looked tired, unaware of our presence. Moretti raised his hand. We held our breath. The enemy passed, disappearing into the trees. We exhaled in unison. That narrow escape drained us, but we still had a mission. We continued northeast, careful to avoid tracks. Hours later, snow turned to slush near a partially frozen river. We found a ruined stone mill beside the water. Its wheel hung crooked, frozen mid-motion. A wooden door remained intact. We approached cautiously. Inside, the air smelled of mold and damp wheat. Sunlight slipped through cracks. The mill offered shelter, but also uncertainty. Sergeant Klein and I searched the upper floor. Dust covered everything. In a corner, we found a child's wooden toy, half-carved, abandoned. Klein sighed. War leaves no one untouched. Downstairs, Lang managed to get a clearer radio signal. A familiar voice came through command. Alpha unit, proceed to waypoint Echo. Reinforcements en route. Avoid main roads. Hostile armor nearby. Relief washed over us. We finally had direction. Moretti studied the map. Waypoint Echo lay beyond the river, near an abandoned railway tunnel. We rested briefly, eating cold rations. My hands shook from fatigue. Klein offered me a cigarette. I declined. Smoke felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. Instead, I stared at the fireless hearth and imagined it blazing with warmth. Mid-afternoon, we set out again. The river crossing was treacherous. Thin ice cracked under our weight. We moved slowly, spacing ourselves. Lang slipped, plunging his leg into freezing water. We hauled him out, teeth chattering. We wrapped his leg in spare cloth. He insisted he could continue. His determination impressed me. Beyond the river, the terrain flattened. Abandoned train tracks cut across the landscape. Rusted rails stretched like scars beneath the snow. A small station stood nearby. Roof caved in, windows shattered. We approached. Inside, we found old tickets, scattered like leaves. A large map of the railway hung on the wall, edges curling. Someone had drawn markings on it, arrows, circles, notes in a language we barely understood. Suddenly, a metallic clink echoed. We spun, weapons up. A soldier emerged from the shadows, hands raised. His uniform was torn, his face pale. He spoke our language with difficulty. "Don't shoot," he said. "I'm alone." We searched him. No weapons. He said his name was Pavel, a deserter. He claimed his unit had been decimated and he fled, seeking refuge. Moretti questioned him quietly. Pavel offered to guide us to the tunnel. He knew the terrain. Trust was a gamble. But time pressed us. Moretti nodded, allowing Pavel to accompany us. Twilight descended. We followed Pavel through scrub and snow, away from the tracks. He spoke little, pointing the way. He moved with quiet precision. I watched him closely, unsure of his motives. Finally, we reached the tunnel, an immense cavern of stone and steel. Its entrance yawned wide, darkness thick within. Old signs warned of collapse. We set a perimeter torch. The light flickered, casting long shadows. Inside, the air smelled of rust and decay. Water dripped from the ceiling. We advanced slowly. The tunnel curved, swallowing sound. Our footsteps echoed. Halfway through, a distant clang startled us. Weapons rose. We waited. Silence returned. We continued, nerves raw. In a side chamber, we found crates covered in dust, inside medical supplies and canned food. A miracle. We took what we could carry. Then came voices from deeper within, foreign, tense. Moretti signalled silence. We crept forward. We saw them. Enemy soldiers gathered near a rail cart, loading supplies, their uniforms dirty, their faces drawn. They looked as tired as we felt. We could slip past or engage. Moretti weighed options. Suddenly, Lang stumbled, his pack scraping stone. The noise echoed. Enemy soldiers snapped to attention. "Down!" Moretti ordered. Gunfire erupted. Bullets ricocheted. We dove behind old machinery. I fired blindly, heart pounding. Muzzle flashes lit the darkness. Chaos, screams, the stench of cordite. Klein shouted, "Flank left!" I crawled through debris, weaving past rusted beams. I saw an enemy soldier aiming toward Lang. I fired. He fell. Grenades exploded, sparks raining. Debris showered down. The tunnel trembled. Moretti surged forward, leading us. We pressed hard. Outnumbered but desperate, we fought with everything we had. Slowly, the enemy faltered. One by one, they fell or fled. The cart toppled, supplies spilling. Silence returned, broken only by ragged breathing and dripping water. We regrouped. Lang was wounded shrapnel in his shoulder. Pavel helped bandage him. Moretti searched the bodies. He found maps, notes, orders. "They were preparing to move deeper," he said. "We need to warn command." But the radio was damaged during the fight. Lang tried to fix it with trembling hands. Sparks flew. Nothing. We decided to exit the tunnel on the far side, hope for signal. We moved carefully, supporting Lang. Pavel guided us. Outside, night had fallen. Stars pierced the sky. A cold wind sliced through our coats. The world felt endless. We camped beneath the pines. Lang drifted in and out of sleep. Klein murmured prayers. I stared at the stars, wondering if anyone looked back from home. Before dawn, distant artillery thundered. The horizon glowed faintly. We needed to move. We reached a hill overlooking a valley. In the distance, we saw friendly troops engaged in a fierce battle. Tanks clashed. Guns roared. Flames painted the snow orange. Moretti raised binoculars. "We must reach them," he said. "They need support." We descended, navigating through shattered fields. The earth was churned, frozen mud mixing with snow and blood. As we neared the battle, a shell burst nearby, flinging us to the ground. Ears ringing, I crawled. The world became a blur of smoke and fire. We found cover behind a burned-out truck. Moretti assessed. "We flank left," he said. "Hit their supply line." We obeyed. Crawling through trenches, we made our way behind enemy lines. We spotted their supply wagons, 4 trucks guarded by a handful of soldiers. "Quiet," Moretti whispered. We attacked swiftly. Surprise was our ally. Shots echoed. The guards fell. We planted charges on the trucks. Moretti lit the fuse. "Move!" We sprinted. The explosions rocked the valley. Fireballs rose. Enemy lines faltered. Our allies surged forward, gaining ground. Amid the chaos, Pavel vanished. One moment he was beside us, the next, gone. The battle raged. We pushed toward friendly lines. Voices called in familiar tongues. When we reached them, relief overwhelmed us. A medic tended Lang. We reported to their commander, delivering the maps we captured. He nodded grimly. "You've done your part. Rest while you can." But rest never came easily. We found a quiet corner near a shattered wall. Klein handed me a canteen. "One day this will end," he said. I nodded, unsure. The sky above flickered with distant fire. Snow fell softly, as if trying to blanket the scars. Morning arrived with a quiet that felt unreal. The guns had ceased, leaving only wind across broken earth. I wandered toward a ridge overlooking the valley. Smoke drifted lightly, veiling the land. Figures moved like shadows, retrieving wounded and fallen. The war seemed to pause. A chaplain kneeled beside a soldier. I could not hear his words, only stillness. Klein joined me, his face pale. "We're alive," he muttered. I nodded. We stood together, silent. Captain Moretti assembled us. Reinforcements were expected soon. Our orders were to hold the line and prepare. Exhaustion weighed heavily, yet purpose steadied our hands. We cleaned weapons, shared rations, and checked on Lang, who slept. I wrote a letter home, though I doubted it would be sent. I told my mother I was safe, that the mountains reminded me of childhood. I lied tenderly. Hope demanded it. Dawn promised nothing, yet we rose, determined to endure whatever waited. Together, dawn spread slowly across the battlefield, climbing over broken ridges and settling on the scarred valley like a silent witness. The smoke of yesterday's clash drifted upward, thinning into the cold morning air. We moved with caution, stepping around shattered helmets and twisted metal. Every footprint felt heavy with memory. The snow beneath us, once pristine, was now stained by the price of survival. Captain Moretti stood on a mound of frozen earth, surveying what remained of the front. His face was drawn, lined by fatigue and grief. "Command confirmed," he murmured, voice low. "Reinforcements will arrive within 2 days. Until then, we hold this sector." 2 days felt like forever. Sergeant Klein and I walked toward the makeshift camp our allies had established. Tents were arranged in uneven rows, stitched together from tarps and canvas. Fires flickered weakly, offering little warmth. We passed medics moving silently from cot to cot, tending to the wounded with practiced, haunted hands. Their faces revealed the truth. There were not enough supplies, nor enough time. Lang lay inside one of the tents, his shoulder heavily bandaged. He managed a weak smile as we approached. "Still here," he whispered. "Thought I'd sleep through breakfast." "You'd better not," I teased. "We need you to carry the radio when reinforcements come." He chuckled softly, then winced. The medic glanced at us. "He needs rest." We nodded and stepped outside. A gentle snowfall had begun, flakes drifting like pale feathers. The world felt suspended between calm and dread. A courier arrived on horseback, cloak flapping behind him. He delivered a packet of orders to Moretti before galloping away. Moretti gathered us around a burned-out truck that now served as a command table. "Listen carefully," he said. "Intelligence. It reports that the enemy is regrouping just east of the river. Their armor division suffered, but their infantry remains strong. We must prevent them from breaking through before reinforcements arrive. Our objective is to secure the bridge at Hawthorne Crossing. If they take it, they'll cut us off." The bridge, a narrow stone span over a churning river. It was the only solid crossing for miles. We checked our weapons, gathered ammunition, and prepared to move. Klein strapped grenades to his belt with steady hands. I adjusted my coat, feeling the cold seep through every seam. Moretti studied the map once more, then folded it. "We leave in 10 minutes. Before we departed, I returned to Lang's tent. He slept fitfully. I placed a small carved charm beside him, an amulet from the mill, something to guard him. Then I stepped back into the storm. The march toward Hawthorne Crossing was quiet. The path wound through skeletal trees, their branches heavy with snow. Our breath puffed out, in clouds. We kept a tight formation, eyes scanning the horizon. The enemy was somewhere out there, unseen but present. Halfway to the bridge, we met a small platoon of Allied soldiers retreating. Their uniforms were torn, their faces hollow. Their leader, Lieutenant Ramos, stopped us. "The enemy has already begun probing the crossing," he warned. "They shelled the north bank. We held them last night, but many were lost." Moretti nodded grimly. "We'll reinforce the position." Ramos gestured toward the east. "They're sending scouts through the woods. Stay sharp." We pressed on. Soon, the river's roar reached us, mingling with distant echoes of gunfire. The bridge emerged through the haze-arched stone, weathered but still standing. Barricades had been erected along the western end. Allied soldiers crouched behind them, rifles trained across the water. As we approached, a shell whistled overhead. It struck the far bank, sending snow and dirt skyward. Ordered us into defensive positions. The enemy infantry advanced in waves. Shadows moved across the opposite bank, slipping between ruined buildings. Muzzle flashes bloomed, punctuating the morning. We returned fire, bullets snapping through the cold air. My shoulder pressed against stone as I aimed. The recoil jarred through frozen bones. Klein lobbed a grenade. It arced gracefully before exploding among the advancing troops. Snow and screams rose together. Despite our efforts, the enemy pushed closer. They were determined, relentless. Moretti shouted orders, voice hoarse. "Hold the line! Do not let them cross!" I fired until my fingers numbed. My rifle jammed. I cleared it with trembling hands. Snow mixed with powder smoke, forming a grey mist. The world narrowed to sound and motion. When the enemy reached the bridge, hand-to-hand combat erupted. Bayonets clashed. Boots slipped on icy stone. I felt the weight of every strike, every breath. Time dissolved. At some point, I found myself fighting beside Pavel, our unexpected companion from the tunnel. He moved with sharp efficiency, blade flashing. We covered each other instinctively, as though fate had bound us. Then, a deafening boom shook the bridge. An enemy shell hit the central arch, shattering stone. For an instant, the world froze. Cracks spidered across the span. "Fall back!" Moretti shouted. We ran, dragging wounded comrades. The bridge groaned, then collapsed, stones plunging into the river with a roar. Water surged, swallowing the remnants. The enemy, cut off, hesitated. Silence followed, heavy as snow. We regrouped among the trees. Our numbers were smaller now. Faces once familiar were gone. Moretti leaned against a fallen log, catching his breath. "We bought time," he said. "They won't cross there now." But the victory felt hollow. The cost was visible in every missing face, every limp body. We retreated west, bound for the main camp. Snow continued to fall, concealing the scars of battle. Pavel walked beside me, silent. His eyes held a distant sorrow. I wondered where he would go when this war ended, if any of us would know what to do in peacetime. As night approached, we reached the camp. Fires flickered faintly. Medics rushed to tend the wounded. Lang was still alive, sleeping. Moretti gathered us once more. "We held the crossing," he said softly. "Reinforcements will arrive soon. Until then, we rest." We lay beneath a tarp, sharing thin blankets. The ground was cold, but exhaustion claimed us. I dreamt of home, of bread and quiet streets, of sunlight without smoke. When I woke, dawn was breaking again. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying both promise and warning. I rose, gripping my rifle. The war was not over, but for now, we had survived another day. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.